Today's episode of Ivory GC, Alex Zozos. Alex, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting.
Yeah. So we typically start these episodes with talking about your background, letting people get to know who you are as an attorney, what kind of shaped the attorney you are today. You had a pretty interesting and relevant business background before starting law school. So why don't you kind of start from the beginning, maybe after undergrad or undergrad, and talk a little bit about your early career experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, right? Like our careers are shaped by the macro environment that we're involved in. And so like being someone that graduated in 2008, clearly the great financial crisis uh, kind of imparted or impacted my career trajectory, direction in general. Yeah, I actually remember giving like an interview because I was hired by Bear Stearns and then ended up going to work for JP Morgan. And there was a period of time there where I didn't know whether I had a job or not. I remember giving some interview where it was like something of like, you know, things are going to come your way that you don't really know. It's, the people that succeed are like the people that kind of take the lumps and take the next step. And so, yeah, I feel like that's kind of what happened with me. Obviously, I was a finance accounting major, really was interested in markets and those dynamics, but like starting work in the great financial crisis, the overlaying market regulatory side of things kind of was new to me, and I didn't
Yeah.
really understand it, and it very much intrigued me. And so given that like there was a lot of uh like mentioned, like I worked in prime brokerage at JP Morgan because eventually there was some clarity that the group that I was going to go in was going to be brought on full time at JP Morgan. But prime brokerage, one of the 50% of their business is really providing access to securities for shorting them from hedge funds. And yeah, like within the first few weeks of my employment, the SEC, who I had not really heard of or were familiar with, kind of said, "Hey, you guys cannot short this long list or provide access for shorting this long list of securities." So that was news to me, but also, created an area to explore that curiosity,
Yeah.
and led me down a path of really trying to like figure out who the SEC is and what type of uh, interesting aspects of the market do they touch and affect.
So how long were you at JP Morgan, and what were you spending most of your time doing at that? Because you went to JP Morgan out of Villanova undergrad, and then so what did you kind of focus your early financial career on?
Yeah, I mean, so it was there for 3 years. So not too long, but not too short. I mean, I feel like that's
Yeah.
like the Goldilocks period of time. Um, but yeah, it was there, and it was placed into like a rotational program for the first year and a half or so. And it's always funny, like I think for a lot of people, and I don't know if it's correlation or causation or what, but like things that you interact with early on continue to protrude into your life later on. And so for me, we did a lot of client service work there for the various hedge fund clients. And some of that was like handling what are called trade breaks, where a hedge fund does a trade at one place and another counterparty knows or doesn't know the exact same terms, and how to make sure those terms line up. And
Hmm.
like that's pretty back office heavy, like plumbing type work that one I didn't fully grasp at the time as I was like helping clear up these breaks from these
Yeah.
like super long old printer style paper things that were printed out on a daily basis and that we all would roll through. But yeah, I mean, eventually I happened to go to the SEC and work on underlying market infrastructure. And now in
Yeah.
my current space in like securities on blockchain, I mean, what we're looking to do is essentially completely disintermediate and ensure that those types of breaks are not possible to happen. So in a long way, like that first job was dealing with the same type of problem that I'm dealing with now, but like completely different approach, like one from a client service to legal, but like
Yeah.
all around the
Yeah.
same around the same rim.
So you're getting exposure to the traditional financial infrastructure, how it's playing out in real time with these sophisticated trades. Eventually, you decided to go to law school. What prompted that transition?
Yeah, I mean, again, I felt like the macro environment was leading into that. I also feel like going to any form of grad school, I think, is a good decision if you're looking to like make a change. I didn't see the trajectory in my role there growing as dynamically as it would have if I went to like a grad school, which I think can be an accelerant. And
Yeah.
so like the interest in understanding the underlying financial markets more that law school provided, as well as like an opportunity to accelerate my career trajectory were kind of the motivating factors there. Uh, and then, like the macro in general, right? Like there was a large cohort of people in that time frame that like hid out in law school for the period of time. I mean, like I was lucky enough to have a job, but I still think it was like there was a lot of uneasiness. And so like
Yeah.
all of those things combined led to my decision to make the jump.
So you were at Fordham Law School, and was it during law school you at some point you interned at FINRA? Was that during law school or after?
Yeah. So while in law school, I took a few formative courses that kind of continued to scratch this itch. One of them was admin law. Another was my securities regulation teacher. I mean, I still the way he describes things is like, the 33 Act, 34 Act was written so long ago, and technology has updated and changed so significantly, and lawyers help kind of bring those two together. So anyway, taking those two courses really kind of led me to want to continue to explore that space. And so, was able in Fordham's in New York, was able to work during the year at FINRA, working on more enforcement matters, which was very interesting. And then from there, that was in the spring of law school, and then in the summer went down to the SEC and was part of the summer honors attorney program too. So both of those in a back-to-back way were really, in addition to like, if I'm now playing it back in my head, it was like each semester was like I took admin law or legislation regulation, then I took securities regulation, and then the next semester I was interning at FINRA, and then the following months I was spending time at the SEC. So all of those were continuing to build up on top of them.
So how'd your exposure to the regulatory environment at JP Morgan, how did it differ? What were you able to take from your financial background and kind of apply it in the early start of your legal career, getting exposed to the regulatory environment at FINRA and the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the joke with lawyers, right? Like they're not numbers people. And I think, I think it's always a benefit to be able to see the world through the businesses side of things.
Yeah.
And so like generally already having an interest in finance and markets is a plus. And then additionally, like seeing things from like a client perspective, because you were asking lawyers at a certain point or various things from the other side, I think always is a benefit. And so like, yeah, that was kind of the takeaway, was like just this general interest in like understanding even like terms, right? Like a lot of people don't like, there's a like lawyers know that there's a language of law. There's also like a language of finance, I think, and just kind of like being conversant in that language is super helpful. So like
Yeah.
just like steeping yourself in something that you find interest in allows you to gain the vocabulary, and then learning the law side of things, you know, whichever comes first or second, I think like in general, should be something you're interested in,
Yeah.
or at least you find dynamic. And then you can continue to like grow out both the language and like the underlying principles and motivations for why things are the way they are from a regulatory or legal perspective.
Yeah. So you take those experiences at FINRA and the SEC as an intern, and you start after Fordham at the SEC as an attorney advisor at the Division of Trading and Markets. Then you moved your way up through that division. Tell us a little bit about your time, kind of how long you were a licensed attorney at the SEC, and what you took from that experience.
Yeah. I mean, first, I loved being at the SEC. It's like
Yeah.
a fantastic place. You know, it's mission driven. You know, loved, you know, first day there, you take an oath, and you're going to uphold the mission, and you know, there's just at the time there was just fantastic leadership at the top. It was Mary Jo White, and a number of other great commissioners and directors that were there. And so like I found the work was super dynamic and interesting and meaningful. The people were super nice and generous, and accomplished. And so, and then there was opportunity to raise your hand, and get broader, you know, exposure to developing spaces. And again, like this goes back to that thing where it's like stuff that I ended up getting some exposure to on a happenstance ended up like coming down the pike and being influential in my career thereafter. And so like worked on secondary trading for like digital assets. There was like a time when that was in vogue, uh, before our current phase of that. And then the Bitcoin ETFs were running through the groups that I was in. And so like that was a matter of just like raising my hand and being available for or interested, in those. But then it was like also the people that I was working with were very generous with their time, and when you would ask
Yeah.
them questions, they would give you answers. And I think a lot of that, uh, is a function of like when you work for government, you're not subject to like the billable hour type world. And so like I found that to be a fantastic way, to learn,
Yeah.
you know, very niche areas,
Mm.
but like also very interesting. And so like yeah, don't have I would like highly recommend government service for anyone, not just the SEC, but like all government agencies, and not even just federal, state. I think it's a great way to, uh, you know, provide work in service of others. That's like Fordham's motto. So there's work in
Yeah.
service of others, and then in addition, like it pays back itself because like throughout my entire career, you know, it's very informative to understand how the sausage is made, to have the alumni network, um, and then also like generally to be known as like the SEC attorney is just something that is super valuable. And
Yeah.
so like I didn't have a full appreciation of that going into it, but like very much, am aware of how fantastic of an opportunity that was, and has been for me going forward.
Yeah. At some point, you decide to go into a law firm, outside counsel practice. Talk a little bit about that transition and what you focused on as outside counsel.
Yeah, I mean, so as much as I was talking about how at the SEC I got a lot of like niche and deep and broad knowledge base, um, I think outside counsel is even, my time as an outside counsel, and especially at the where I was at Lowenstein Sandler, working under a partner named Ethan Silver, who really, has did a good job of establishing himself as like a go-to for developing fintech, players in the space. Like he very much helped Robinhood and eToros and Brex and a lot of the big names, and so, that kind of came out of that era. And so it was really cool to broaden what I was doing. It wasn't just securities, and it wasn't, you know, just broker dealer. It was like investment advisors, funds, it was payments, it was touching on
Hmm.
some banking. And so really working with and helping develop those with those clients was a great experience. That being said, outside counsel is a tough job. They're even more so you learn through osmosis there, where it's like you want to make sure that you're giving the client actionable advice, and not like, I felt like my time at the SEC, as much as I loved it, did create a dynamic, especially coming straight out of law school, where I could be a little bit more professorial, and so like I think that time as an outside counsel helped me help train me to understand, like, answer the question that's asked, but like
Hmm.
deliver it in a way and to deliver in a way that's actionable. So I think that was a great experience. But that being said, like, I really did miss the itch of like that mission of like building something or working for something larger than yourself. And like, obviously you care as an outside counsel, like how your clients do, but like probably in a more like selfish way, because if they do well, then you do well, and they'll bill more, etc. Whereas like I feel like at the SEC, obviously the client was the investing public, and then like what pushed me to move in-house in my next role was like being part of like the growth or in the navigation of like an emerging area, which was Coinbase. So like that was kind of what pushed me to go in-house.
Yeah. So I mean, you start getting this familiarity with digital assets, Bitcoin ETFs at the SEC. You go to Lowenstein Sandler and further refine your acumen in that area, and then you go into Coinbase and you're all in on digital assets and trading. Talk a little bit about what you were able to take from the SEC and Lowenstein Sandler into Coinbase, and how it really prepared you to be an effective in-house attorney for Coinbase.
Yeah, and again, like I think it's been super helpful to have this background for myself. Uh, I'd highly recommend it to anyone, in any order, to have like a regulator plus an outside counsel type role. I think that really does help develop the ability to see uh, things through a varied lens. And so like
Yeah.
I feel like I'm very much able to see in a reasonable way, like where regulators are coming from, like what their motivations are. I'm also, I think, able to hear and listen to and understand the demands of an outside, counsel client that, just wants to get it done. And so like managing or bringing those two sides together, and they're typically not that far off, right? It's just a
Yeah.
matter of like not wanting to do something that you don't need to do, versus like making sure that you can like get comfort from a regulatory standpoint that like, whatever mission you're trying to carry out as a regulator is met. And so
Yeah.
like having that type of background and then going in-house, I think was super beneficial. That being said, like, all stops along the way, it was always, learning through osmosis and through like, people use the term mentor a lot. I really do think it's just like seeking out models that you like or that you don't like. And right, like they don't all have to be like perfect. Sometimes it's very informative to have a model that isn't good. Like if you have a bad manager on a project, right? Like that can be just as telling. But like I think the key in both of those is some form of like introspection and taking that step outside of yourself to say like, all right, like this is good, why? This is bad, why? And how do I want to model or not model from each of them? And like that can happen through osmosis. It also, I found it to be highly effective when you find someone that you do like, to be direct and to ask for like, how did you do this and why did you do this? And like a lot of times it's like super simple stuff that you can
Yeah.
just look to internalize, and that's like creating a to-do list, or like following up all like on after everyone that you speak to, or things like that. And like those are like small little things that really can like have amplifying effects going forward. I mean, and like everyone is a work in progress, so always be kind to yourself, because like I have this grand ambition of like summarizing a case or a rule like once a week, and then having created, because I've heard someone that's done this and I really want to do it. I still haven't gotten around to doing it, right? But like I think like those types of things of just like consistently improving upon who you are as an attorney and as a person in general. I guess like a lot of this, like your career and how you operate as a lawyer, like bleeds into your life as well. But like in general, I think like uh, the varied background and moving through these various stations have been influenced significantly by like the great people that I was able to work with and learn from.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about how the Coinbase in-house legal department was structured, what you were doing kind of on a day-to-day basis, and you know, how that evolved over time. Is it you started as senior counsel and then moved up to associate general counsel before taking the opportunity at Superstate? Talk a little bit about in some detail your work at Coinbase.
Yeah, I think an important thing is to always remain flexible as well. Um, I think generally as attorneys we are very linear in the way we approach things, and even like I think the pathways to promotion in some ways are viewed very in a linear manner, uh and so it's like first you go to school, then you go to law school, then you become this and that, right? And like there's this
Yeah.
step function that people typically fall into. uh at Coinbase, like I was started as a product counsel. So like the structure that Coinbase operates under is kind of modeled after Google, where product is kind of defined liberally, and then each product counsel is like assigned various like products, and they are essentially like the general counsel for that that
Oh,
product.
interesting.
And so like, yeah, I was like spearheading some of our initiatives to try and move forward securities and facilitate those for Coinbase. You know, Coinbase owned two broker dealers, et cetera. But like as I was and like taking a step back, it was a fantastic time to be there. Before we went public, there was astronomical growth, both from like a company standpoint, but also from like a like from a business standpoint, but also from a company standpoint. So like I think I joined and there were like, I don't know, 15, 20 people. And then like within the year, there were like 120 people. And so like that was just like moonshot growth internally. Um, and so like navigating those waters was also challenging. But again, like I think the key there is just to like continue to roll with the punches, continue to add value, and work as a team. Because I think sometimes people feel like someone's intruding on something, or this is my thing or your thing. I think if there's this mutual trust where you have an idea that like you're going to be better off from like a lot, like teaching someone how to do something and leveling people up, like that is like an ideal scenario and work environment. So anyway, so like that was kind of the macro environment. But like within Coinbase, like things continue to evolve within, you know, what I was working on, and certain initiatives were prioritized or deprioritized, and I moved through them. Obviously the SEC eventually like sued Coinbase, and like some of my background from like my former employer suing my current employer, you know, like that was informative to kind of like get you know, provide some assistance there. So yeah, I mean, it was I think remaining flexible, and it was kind of communicated to the legal team that that's like an important skill set, because things are going to change, and if you're moving in an area that is evolving, like if you are, and I think this is sometimes like looking back at the SEC, I feel like there are more defined roles within the SEC, and you can create your own path there. But at a government agency, or even probably at a much larger organization, there are much more defined roles and responsibilities. At more, you know, novel spaces of industry, and especially at like regardless of industry, at an emerging type company, I think, you know, you need to be all hands on deck, and, you know, be willing to pitch in, because again, I think it goes back to my motivation of being like in it for more than just like the job and the paycheck. It's more like, I want to figure this out. I want to work to like build and grow with this team. And so
Yeah.
if you can take that approach to things, I think like you can have a much more enjoyable experience, and you feel uh, much less threatened. I feel like that's the other thing, is like one of the central tenets that Coinbase has is like I think it's like assume the best in people, right? And so like I feel like uh and we were a remote environment company, I think there's very much opportunity to assume that there's something motivated in a malicious way or something of that nature. And to the extent that you can control for that, I think it will only benefit your interactions, your perception of people, and what you can get done within a larger like legal org and larger company in general.
Yeah. So, I mean, you obviously got an in-depth exposure to cryptocurrency at Coinbase. Talk a little bit about what your current employer, Superstate, you're the general counsel there. Talk a little bit about the difference between the business and Superstate first, between what Superstate's doing and how it was similar but different to what you're doing at Coinbase.
Yeah. I mean, Coinbase is wide ranging within the crypto space. I think like their bread and butter is like being an on ramp to the crypto economy. So you're able to purchase, underlying digital assets. And the way I view, there's a number of different ways that digital assets are used, but and so like one is Bitcoin, which the narrative is digital gold. There's scarcity. It goes up and down in value for a number of reasons. But that's kind of what like the OG digital asset is in Bitcoin. Then like Ethereum is kind of like a completely different type of digital asset, and a number of other types of digital assets are kind of like made in a similar vein as Ethereum. But what Ethereum is like it's essentially you pay and use ETH to run the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM. And so what it creates is this infrastructure layer that allows for uh, people to transact or transfer value, but reach consensus through incentivized uh, structures. So like when you move something on Ethereum, the people that validate that transaction are then rewarded with additional ETH. And so that's infrastructure, and like what you can do with that infrastructure, you can build various smart contracts and things like that. And so like again, like what Coinbase bread and butter, again, they have a number of different things, is like allowing you to purchase these raw materials like your Bitcoin, your ETH, whatever, your Polygon, your Solana, etc. And then like what we're doing now at Superstate is like right now, just on the Ethereum network, we're utilizing a certain contract type, which is called an ERC20, which essentially just defines certain characteristics of the smart contract, which allows for like there to be interoperability with other ERC20 contracts. And so that's kind of like a pretty basic standard of Ethereum tokens that are out there. And what we're doing is we're putting actual securities on, like fund securities on the Ethereum network. And so what that does is it leverages the Ethereum distributed network and allows for programmable transactions, right? And or peer-to-peer transactions. And so like that differs from like how our current traditional financial structure exists. Because like our current structure exists, everything goes through a number of intermediate layers. So like you have
Mhm.
where it goes to like really all securities are now dematerialized, which means they don't really have a piece of paper, but they used to. So now they don't have a piece of paper. They're database entry at this one place called depository trust company, and then the various broker dealers have like are part of DTC, and then you as the underlying beneficial owner are on the books and records of the broker dealer. And so like if you're looking at it, it's like there's CD and Co, which is part of DTC, there's the clearing broker dealers, and then there's you, the owner. And so like you don't actually own your securities, right? Like you own them through some layers of ownership. Whereas what we're looking to build is like, hey, you actually own them on the blockchain network on Ethereum. And then what does that allow you to do? It allows you to move them around more freely. It allows you, instead of like needing to, if you wanted to leverage your securities or your wealth in some way, like the only place you could do that is your broker. But here you could plug in your securities into any number of people that are willing to borrow or lend with you. And so really it gives you a lot more utility and capabilities with your assets. And then in addition, like there's also these things called stable coins, right? So there's like the money that you can go and purchase with these things. So you have the money and the securities on the same network, which all works together. And so it creates a lot of operational efficiencies. It also creates a lot more utility that can come from that. But I do realize I just threw like a ton of stuff out there. So
well, it's a complicated new field. So I mean, if you take one of the kind of the core concepts of Superstate, tokenizing assets, talk a little bit about kind of what that means and how that's being done, and tie it back. So I'm sure you touched on that as you were just going over kind of the high level business model of Superstate, but talk about that that term that we see quite a bit, a little bit more specifically.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and like the term real world assets is something that that's used a lot. And so like um the way I view it is it's like essentially just another form of dematerialization. And like instead of like having everything sit in a box at depository trust company, um it we hold things at a bank, right? Like we hold we have two funds. We have a treasury fund that holds treasuries, and so we hold treasuries at the bank. And then if you purchase a share in our treasury fund, you own a portion of those treasuries. But like that representation is on that ownership share is on the blockchain, and so you can transfer that among other people that have met our qualifications and standards. And so like, does it mean to tokenize, and what are we doing with real world assets is really just, instead of like, a lot of these right now are private securities. Like right now, like how private securities are like handled is like paper, peer to peer. You like sign the back of something over to someone else, and then that's how like ownership is transferred. What this is doing is saying, hey, we're going to dematerialize these, but we're going to represent that ownership on the blockchain. And like, we know it's true because the infrastructure layer of Ethereum is battle tested, and it works because there's however many nodes out there, uh, uh, you know,
Validating the
verifying.
transactions, right? That's
Exactly.
that kind of nodes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then so the key considerations for compliance when issuing tokenized securities, what's top of mind for you in the regulatory space?
Yeah. I mean, so again, probably comes full circle back to like the SEC at this point. Um, for whatever reason, this last administration, I mean, look, crypto didn't do itself any favors with like FTX and the massive fraud that was there, but like there was a lot, eh, disappointingly, uh, in my opinion, uh, like a lack of engagement from the SEC and trying to actually like promulgate rules, and a lot of confusion that was happening. And so like what I'm describing are like securities that are represented in a different form. But like where the industry has kind of been stuck is like trying to define these like various other like network type tokens, and like describing them, are those securities, are they commodities? And then if you need to raise money to build the network, like how do you do that? And so like all of that has become like very unintelligible at this point, and it's very confused.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is some legislation called like Financial Inclusion Technology Act of 2021, FIT 21 for short, that it really like hopes to try and draw these lines of demarcation better. But like where we're at Superstate, it's like, all right, we already have like the Ethereum network is up and running. People are doing a ton of stuff on this. And like, why don't we put a real world asset like a security on here and leverage that infrastructure for like the purpose of transferring value? And like, by the way, we're already doing this with stablecoins, which is essentially like dematerialized dollars that you move from over the Ethereum network. And then it's like, all right, so why don't I use Venmo or PayPal? And it's like, well, it's the exact same thing, except Venmo and PayPal is a closed system where it's like you can only transfer from one Venmo person to another Venmo person. But like with USDC, anyone that's plugged into the Ethereum network can transfer in a peer-to-peer basis. And so like this is just another building block within building this like new interconnected value transferring infrastructure.
So how do you see things progressing? I mean, we've got a traditional financial system that works in some ways similarly to a digital asset infrastructure, in some ways very differently. Do you see there being a kind of merge of the traditional system with the new, or how do you see things progressing over the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think it is a question mark, right? Like there isn't
Yeah.
like clarity there.
Yeah.
Like if I was king for a day, or if I understand, if I'm a student of history and I'm seeing how things have transpired in the past, what I think is going to be happen is the SEC is going to favor choice, and regulators are going to favor choice, and then they're going to let the market decide. And it's not going to be unbridled choice. It's going to be choice with, proper investor protections and ensuring that the various networks are, not susceptible to fraud and manipulation and various things like that. But like
Yeah.
the most instructive historical time period is there was in the late 70s, there was just the great paperwork crisis, which happened, and essentially like all of Wall Street got shut down because at that point, all stock ownership representation was paper form, and you needed to physically move it back and forth. But with the advent of telecom, there was a significant more amount of trading that was happening, and the movement of the paper just wasn't able to keep up with that. And so what they did was they allowed for this dematerialized version of stock ownership to happen, and which was essentially just like, hey, all of these various broker dealers, you guys plug into this one place, and you guys own this thing, DTC, and then then instead of moving them from like all across the country or various places even within the city, you're just saying Goldman Sachs to JP Morgan, and then you net out at the end of the day. And so like that works pretty well. It's still just very much a closed system. But when that transition happened from paper to like this DTC world, what happened was it's like you can still have a paper security, right? Like there's nothing that's
Mhm.
prohibiting you from having that. But like people opt into the DTC system because there's a lot more liquidity and functionality that can happen in that world.
Yeah.
I think within this new crypto world, there's a lot more utility and functionality that can happen there. And so again, if you have an active regulator that creates guidelines that you can follow, and you can go through the front door and you can register and you can create, a different form of ownership, and then allow the market to decide, like we'll see where things go from there. But I think using that as a point of reference, I think there will not be a bar on something. I just think there's going to be a choice, and
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe it doesn't materialize as far as being like that much better. Maybe people want the closed system. I think historically people have always tended to favor more choice and more openness and more control.
Yeah. Now, how far do you think the current regulatory structure is going to get digital assets? And do you think, for the remaining 10%, 15%, 20%, we need some new regulations or some new laws that are specifically designed for digital assets?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it can get you pretty far. What we have right now can get you pretty far. I think the challenge is the modern securities regulatory scheme is designed around intermediaries and this system that enables a lack of intermediaries. And so like responsibilities still need to fall somewhere. And so you need to like draw lines on where those responsibilities should fall. But like, I mean, I've been on a theoretical level kind of just still having this conversation where it's like, even on the like, what is a broker dealer, right? Like the way we define broker dealer is like very, very broad in law, and how it's been applied has been very, very sweeping. But at the end of the day, like the harms that you're looking to guard against are really like a broker that has discretion over your orders, like taking and doing something that you don't want them to do with them because they have some authority. But like since like mid 90s and even early, late 80s, there was like this form technology was kind of imparting new ways of doing what we call self-directed brokerage, right? And so like the fears and the concerns are quite different than like when you used to call up your broker and like they would need to get to know you in a different way because they had discretion and were really the gatekeeper and influencer of how you were making investment decisions. So again, like I think this is like a broader question of like what are the you have to like look from first principles is like what are the functions that a certain counterparty is performing, and
Yeah.
is there a counterparty, right? Because like sometimes there's an ability to have code that can execute a transaction based upon inputs that are provided, and then it's like, all right, is there actually an intermediary there, or is there just essentially like a peer to like peer-to-peer, like assisted by a protocol, which is essentially just rules on when and to carry out a certain action. And so I think those were so what I'm outlining right now are difficult questions that need to be answered,
Yeah.
where we've kind of been for the last 4 years because the last administration, again, I'm not completely absolving the crypto industry, and FTX had a very bad taste for regulators, but there where we've been mired in right now is just a lot of like attempts to just completely throw this entire industry out,
Uh-huh.
rather than engaging in these difficult questions where it's like this technology can allow for greater functionality and use. And I'm only focused on and dealing with at Superstate like these types of like super heavy financial type questions, because that's just like where I'm focused and what I know and understand. But there's a number of other like non-securities like types of applications for utilizing some form of distributed ledger tech. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of surface area to cover, but like in this space, I think it's super exciting and it's super interesting because it really is taking these outdated laws and then ensuring there's like the mission of the SEC is like carried out, and then also like pressing forward in this space because there's just very interesting and novel improvements that are available right now.
You've operated a lot in an area of unknown to kind of how regulations or regulators are going to apply the regulations to companies in your industry. How's your approach to risk management evolved over time, especially when handling high stakes decisions at places like Coinbase and Superstate?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? Like from like the lawyer perspective, it's something I did have to evolve on, where it's not never black and white, right? I think lawyers really, as much as like we think we have um like divine knowledge on like what the rule of law is, there's always gradations of gray. And so like what I think I think I had mentioned this before, it's like providing actionable advice. And so like what that means to me is like going through the possible outcomes and then understanding the likelihood of each of them. And then based upon the combination of the various outcomes and the likelihood of them occurring, providing a recommendation. That being said, like I don't feel like legal should be a decide unless it's like a flashing red, like if you step on this like this
Yeah.
square,
Yeah.
you go straight to jail. It's like, okay, no, that's no, 100%
Yeah.
no, or you
Yeah.
loud exit, right? Like that's those that's an obligation as an attorney. But if it's like this is a gray area, this could be interpreted this way, or this way, and it's 30% from each of them, I would probably take the middle choice and say it's a 33% chance. But like, choose your own adventure. And like also in light of all of the other decisions that you're making, right? Because if you continue to take a high risk choice on every other high risk choice, those aren't happening in a vacuum.
And it has to be taken in the business context too, right? I mean, maybe you get more aggressive or take a more progressive on some of your, well, it depends. Maybe more significant initiatives, maybe the high dollar risk issues, you're a little bit more conservative, but it all is taken into consideration with what you're trying to do as a business. As someone at the forefront of legal strategy in blockchain and fintech, what is one innovation or trend in the industry that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just like the space. I'm super close right now. So I do think like one of the things that we just did for one of our funds, our treasury fund, is like typically funds are have their net asset value or like what the fund is worth like determined once a day or struck once a day. And like that's just kind of how convention has been done. But like for our fund now, like we're striking NAV on a second by second basis. So like you can purchase it with what the value is at that second. And so like the tagline that we use and that I agree with is like we're kind of like updating how the fund underlying works to like be at the speed of blockchain. And so like that, like again, like in a prior context, it wouldn't have really mattered, right? It didn't matter that like
Yeah.
you could only do it once a day. But like now, why are you only doing it once a day? And like, yes, some things go up and down, and some of the underlying assets could make that like determining that valuation more challenging for different investment approaches. But for a fund that's holding treasuries, that's not really a problem. But like it hasn't been done yet, and it really was a question of like why, and the answer back was like why not really. And so like we've
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
pushed forward with that. So like that's like a super exciting one. I think like moving forward into like some of these lending protocols in the DeFi space where you're not really facing off against an intermediary. I think that's super interesting. And like yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done in this space, and there's a lot of excitement in this space. I mean, we're filming or we're taping in mid-November, right after the election, and in the last 2 weeks, the price of Bitcoin has shot up, and there's a lot of excitement of a changing of administrations at the SEC that's going to be more inclined to be more engaged on these topics. So I think what's necessary is to have like difficult conversations to say like, all right, what is the risk that we're looking to control for, and how are we doing it, and is there
Yeah.
equivalency to the existing system? So like so
Yeah.
long as we start having those difficult conversations, there's like so much possibility on the other side of them.
This is great. Well, Alex, I'll let you know, we end these episodes with kind of a piece of advice you give to a junior lawyer or aspiring lawyer who wants to be somewhere where you are down the road. What would you say to him or her?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do think that like nugget on like assuming the best in people, because I do think as a profession we have like a healthy bit of skepticism always, but like I think like the key is always, people have motivations from their clients and things like that, but like if you assume malice in people, I think it really can cloud your judgment and hamper your professional development. So I think like assume the best in people is one, and then two, uh, you know, always be generous with your time, and always be willing to learn from others, because there's so much information out there. Uh, I've, and I'm sure you have always have leaned and learned on heavily from others that know so much, or who have gone down various paths in before you. So we stand on all of their shoulders and their guidance. And so like similarly, the next part of that is also like being generous with your time, is just paying that forward as well. So yeah, I think if you can like assume the best, you can learn from others and be generous with your time, I think you can really have a very interesting career wherever that leads you.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for being generous with your time, for joining us on this episode, and wish you all the best. And we'll be following as the regulatory environment changes and the industry changes. But thank you for coming on.
Awesome. Really. Thank you so much.